I'll call the meeting to order and ask for public comment on non-agenda items. Hearing none, I will go through the conflict of interest declarations, starting with Brian Wheeler.
I don't believe so. The only one that would be a potential conflict is employee house or subcommittee topic, and I'd put that out there just in case anybody has any issues.
Well, we talked about this and I don't. So then we'll have Peter Manka.
None. Thank you.
Dick Fast.
I just wanted to put it on the record for those other.
Bill Shropshire.
None.
And I don't have any as well. We're on to the consent agenda. We have the minutes from September 21st and the sewer and water operator reports. Does any of the trustees have any comments or questions?
Nope, none here.
Where's Terry?
He is signed out.
What does that mean?
Well, he's not here.
Is he on vacation?
Well, he apparently didn't call in either, and I called him last week. Never heard back from him.
All right, he's on vacation or something?
Yep.
All right. No questions or comments. I would entertain a motion for the consent agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I'll second that motion.
We have a motion by Peter and a second by Brian Wheeler. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
I think it passes unanimously.
I think you covered.
All right, we are into the business action item, which is the only thing we have on the agenda is Powderlight Lot 3 Employee Housing Sewer Connection Permit. And I'm just wondering how the other trustees feel about moving up our subcommittee report, because it has something to do with employee housing and where the committee has made a recommendation. What do people think of that?
That's fine by me. If it's pertinent to the next thing, then we should go through that first.
I agree. I was wondering why it wasn't already up there.
Okay with that.
Fine.
All right, I guess I need a motion to change the order of business. And so can I have a motion on moving up the employee housing committee recommendation?
I'll move that.
I'll second.
Motion by Bill Shropshire and a second by Mike Ducennois. Motion by Bill Shropshire and a second by Mike Ducennois. So let's go on to the Employee Housing Committee, SFE committee recommendation. Ron?
All right. I got the wrong packet up here. Let me get the right one up. So we had, I think, probably 4 committee meetings, and the committee was Peter Manka, Brian Wheeler, Tom Reeves, looking at this whole employee housing situation, SFEs that are potentially assigned to future workforce housing projects. In addition to employee housing, we looked at the accessory dwelling units. We're seeing more of those over time. And we also looked at this for apartments, as we've never had a category of true apartments. We've been using the condominium block for calculating SFEs associated with apartments. So in looking at this, I put together what worked out to be a model. And the basis for that model was our billing system. So we've got a big file that has years and years of data in it going back to 2009. So I put copies of excerpts of these big spreadsheets just to give you a feel for what those things look like. So that file is over 200,000 records. It includes all the water usage data for individual accounts by quarter back to 2009. I did not look at the full history of that. I looked at the last 3 years, 2019, 20, and 21. And in putting the model together, I was using essentially winter quarters, so quarter 4, quarter 1, to look at water usage that would be basically coming into the wastewater plant. If you use quarter 2 and 3, you start getting into irrigation demands, and it skews the data. So in looking at this, I did an analysis looking across the section of developments, condominiums, and single-family homes, and then types of projects that would be considered workforce housing kinds of things. So when we look at the list for my sample set, here's my condominium list. So I've got all these in the model, and these are just pivot tables, which is a fancy name to basically ask your data questions and get outputs from that. And then so for each section, then I've got these averages of gallons per quarter per SFE, gallons per day, and gallons per day per SFE. And I looked at those across each different bucket of development. Go down to the next section. So then I looked at single family homes, and again, a fairly large sample of single family homes across our billing system. And you get the same kind of thing, gallons per day per SFE. The SFEs come from our permits, which are in our billing system. So that is readily available for each of these categories of development. And then for the employee housing usage, we looked at this sample set right here: Big Sky Apartments, Broadwater, Cedar Creek Hill, Meadowview, and Morning Sun as representative types of development that we've got in Big Sky that would be considered workforce or worker housing. And then in putting all that together, we get a summary table.
Hello.
Looks like this,
Yeah.
where condominiums and single family homes work out to about 63 gallons per day per SFE For condos, single-family homes, 60. So there's a pretty good correlation between those two development types. When we look at the sample of condos that are workforce housing and Golden Eagle and Mountain Lodges, we're clearly a bigger number, 78, 77 gallons per day per SFE, which is a 23% increase over condos and single family homes. So the next part of this was to look at, well, what could we do with that information as far as new permits for workforce housing projects? And the recommendation from the committee, and as is demonstrated by the model, it justifies increasing the rate to something that's bigger than our current condominium classes, which are listed here. So the committee recommendation is to create a new category essentially for all condominiums, apartments, ADUs that will be used for workforce housing developments at 1.20 SFEs per 1,000 square feet. So it won't be a graduated thing, it'll just be 1.20. Other recommendations from the committee include the 4 I listed in my report. So we would have a base rate assigned to each unit, whether they're apartments or true condominiums, there'd still be a base rate associated with those. Same thing with accessory dwelling units or accessory apartments. Those would be tagged with a separate base rate, and then separate meters for all new accessory dwelling units. This wouldn't be retroactive. We've got a number of those that have been built, some of which have meters, some do not. So that's kind of the genesis of the 1.20, and it is the culmination of several committee meetings, which I thought the process went well, and so now you've got the recommendation from the committee for the full board's consideration. If this is adopted, we would add this into our rate resolutions, which is the document that has the condominiums, single family residential square footage numbers. But I did not do that for this meeting because I want to see if there's consensus with the full board to do that. So I will stop there. If there's any questions, I can answer those.
Ron, is there any reason why we couldn't adopt this today?
Well, I don't have the resolution put together to present it to you for adoption, but I can do that certainly for the next meeting if there's support for that.
So I'm going to go around and ask the people who weren't in the subcommittee, because I think the subcommittee is pretty dialed in on all the data and the meaning of this. Dick Fast, what do you think?
I like the idea. I do have one question. How does this compare to Firelight? Do we have any information on how much, equivalent gallons per minute or day for SFEs on Moonlight? And do we have the potential there of having the same kind of overcrowding in some of our employee housing that Firelight has? And I'm thinking,
great question. We collect Firelight's meter data through our fixed base system, and we have been doing that. I don't know if Terry can pull that down separately, and we know how many. I think I had done a takeoff on the number of SFEs that are in Firelight a while ago when we were working through the whole potential annexation question, and as far as what their hookup fees might look like with the plant investment charges. So we've got SFEs, we potentially have the meter data. So we could probably figure out what their gallons per day per SFE or per unit looks like there. My guess is it'd be as high or probably higher than what we're seeing with our employee housing sample.
Well, if we apply this to, I think the first issue coming up would be Powderlight. Are there number restrictions on the people that can be, number of people that can be in each unit there, or is it wide Powderlight?
I don't know if anybody's on the meeting that can speak to that.
My opinion, Dick, is that we don't have the enforcement mechanism on any of that stuff, and so we just tried to at least move the ball in the right direction in terms of capturing the potential usage.
It's my understanding that on the case of Powderlight, the 5-bedroom units will house 10 people, and the 4-bedroom units would house 8 people. Whether there's restrictions by covenant or something, I have no idea if that's the case.
This is
I have
Derek
to be
with
worried
TD&H.
if there's no limit on the number of people in there, 1.2 limit on the number of people in there, 1.2 probably isn't going to be high enough.
Somebody trying to say
This
something.
is Derek with TD&H. I'm the site engineer. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah,
We can.
Yep. Afternoon or morning, you guys. There is actually restrictions through Gallatin County. They limit the amount of people you can put in these workforce housing dormitory or apartments by the square footage. You're supposed to provide X amount of square footage per tenant. And like Ron was saying, there's could be a maximum of 10 people in the 5-bedroom or 8 people in the 4-bedroom.
So my question there would be, is there some enforcement mechanism? Because Firelight has a certain capacity as well, I believe, but that is continually overtaxed. That's where
Yeah, part of the BLR process is that Gallatin County was to be included in part. I can pull it up. Sorry, I don't have that in front of me. But yes, Gallatin County does have the means to enforce that ruling.
Okay, thank you.
and these are going to be centrally owned, correct? These aren't going to be condominiumized, is my understanding. Part of the problem at Firelight is they're all condos with covenants.
Powderlight, correct. So we went through the BLR, which is called the building lease or rent. The intent is to lease the units to the workforce or out to workforce. So the intent isn't to condominiumize these.
It can never be condo up there. It can never be condo up there.
Not without going back through Gallatin County.
So Ron, are
Then we'll
those
go back through
metered?
you guys.
Are those metered that we could see if all of a sudden there was a huge increase in flows?
Yeah, so there's a number of meters. They're not individually metered each unit, but each side of the building has a meter associated with that. So if there were increases, whether caused by consumption, some other water demand, we would see that, yes.
And let's be clear that Gallatin County may have the enforcement mechanism. The fact of do they enforce things like this is no. That's the reality. They don't have people to do this, and so it is somewhat of an honor system unless there's some significant complaint.
That could come from us, right?
Potentially. Peter was just saying that could potentially come from the district if it got to be a problem. We don't typically get involved that way, but we could, I suppose. I think the data we looked at, we also had an ad-length discussion about should this apply across all the different condo categories, and the decision by the committee after looking at that and deliberating about that is that the data doesn't support it at this time. So one of the concerns of the committee was that, over time, we're going to see more of these condo units potentially be used for longer term rentals. We know the Housing Trust is pushing for that. And are these demands going to creep up as these condos get more occupied to full-time occupancy? But at the end of the day, the data we've got really doesn't support that argument. That's not to say that maybe 5 years from now that looks different, but at least today it's tracking with single homes. So the committee decided to leave the rest of these square footage numbers alone for now and just create a new category for the workforce housing types of projects, which I agreed with their conclusion on that.
Dick, anything else you want to ask?
The workforce housing is likely to be more of a full-time year round compared to the employee housing that we're using for comparison. Is that a valid concern?
Well, it is, and I'm going to let Brian comment on their properties, the Golden Eagle and Mountain Lodges, because 135 days a year, they are empty, whereas some of these others are certainly year round. Brian, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, Dick, that's a really good comment. First of all, you have seasonal workforce housing, which are the Golden Eagle, Mountain Lodge, no kitchens, and just sleeping areas, and of course, private showers. So this was driven by data. And yes, it's about 130, call it 105 days a year that they're not occupied. When you put a kitchen in the mix, and that's why Ron pulled so much data from those other properties that he outlined from Cedar Creek, Big Sky Apartments, I think some Firelight in there, but you pulled a lot of data. Morning Sun, Broadwater, to say what is the difference there? Well, that 125 days balances out basically with what some of those year-round uses have, just because of the density. But it's a really good question for this reason. Why is that? Well, without kitchens, and we don't allow people to live in there in the off seasons, and haven't because of that, without the kitchens and restaurant facilities. And that's going to continue to build out. I think that, Ron, one point that I want to clarify, again, this was more of a matrix with the data, in the sense that when you look at that, what's up on the screen right now, and you say condominiums, residential, single-family homes, what is your goal? Your goal is to flatten that curve of average gallons per day homes. What is your goal? Your goal is to flatten that curve of average gallons per day per SFE. And he has thousands of data points to do that. And the difference is this, to those who were not on the subcommittee, is that as you raise the SFEs per 1,000 square footage, and you put that in the denominator, of course, it drops the gallons per day, because the higher the SFE allocation, the lower the gallons per day. So I think, Ron looked at it, and I looked at it, at least from a mathematical approach. And we spent 4 months really jumping into this thing. I mean, really jumping in on a couple months where there was a log jam. But it's a mathematical equation. It really is. Because it was flawed, I think, in the past with some of the allocations per dorm or workforce housing, and this will bring that per dorm or workforce housing, and this will bring that into alignment of average gallons per day per use per SFE across the board. Hope that makes sense and adds that mathematical side to this as well.
Thanks,
And
Tom.
then just to underscore the accessory dwelling unit piece of that, I mean, we're seeing more of that kind of development. South Fork, we saw a number of those. I'm sure that'll continue. So this puts forward proposals to clean up how those things go together as well, from metering, base rates, and the SFE calculations for them.
I think I'm just for a data point of the 8 houses that are on my block right now, 6 of them have ADUs.
Yeah.
It's a good data point. I mean, it's a.
Do you have to have a bathroom?
Anything else, Dick?
Bathroom.
No, thank you.
Mike Ducennois, questions, comments?
I guess the only thing I'd have to say about this is if the 1,000 square feet is the right number to use on this. All the data is kind of like flow per unit, and we don't really have optics on how much square footage is per unit, but we're going to apply a square footage number per SFE. So I think that's the case. Anyway, looking at the data on the spreadsheet, it looks like we're just looking at flow per unit, but we don't have the optics of the units. Looks like we're just looking at flow per unit, but we don't have the optics of the units.
Well, we've got the SFEs in the data set, so that's what we were using. What do you think?
You're using the permitted SFEs versus the actual usage?
We're using the permitted SFEs against the gallons per day, right? So it's in there, but the what are you thinking would be a better metric? Or
I don't think we have the data to do what I'm saying. So that would be the problem. It'd be interesting to see how some of this plays out from a square footage basis if we're going to use square footage as the threshold of application. But we don't have that data, right? We don't all the data sets you have with all the condominiums you have. We don't have that data, right? We don't all the data sets you have with all the condominiums you have listed in there. We don't have square footages per unit.
Well, the square footages are in those SFE calculations as those condos are permitted. So is
that a timing issue though, Ron? Have we ever changed our square footage allocations in our ordinance?
That's a great question. The history of this has been we went to square footage in 2008. Prior to that, it was all bedrooms and bathrooms. So a 2-bedroom, 2-bath unit, regardless of size, was 1 SFE. And in 2008, we spent a bunch of time working on changing that, because we were seeing all this stuff going in that they were, avoiding calling spaces bedrooms and calling them gyms and libraries and all this stuff. We said, enough, we're going to even the playing field. And then so in 2008, again, using the data we had at the time, we adopted these tables of square footages. So we've had these in place since 2008. They have not changed. So the 0.95, 0.85, that's all been there since 08. Those have not changed. And the committee did two of our meetings, we talked about should we change those categories, change those 0.95s, 0.85. The committee decided not to do that. Again, because I don't think the data supports changing it. But we're seeing it track pretty close with single family homes.
Right.
So it was all more or less just dealing with the worker type developments we're going to see more and more of here over time.
And Mike, just so I think you probably picked up on it, but we did say condominiums that are being developed as workforce housing would fall into this category, which would be kind of differentiating between condominiums and workforce condominiums.
Right.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the new rate at 1.2 and the rate 1 at 1.17. Why wouldn't you just align those to avoid creative creative definitions of what you're actually building out there?
Well, these were just the 23% against these numbers. So this is what we're going to keep right here.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So these were just scenarios I laid out for the committee. At the end of the day, the option they selected was just to deal with this new category. These will all stay the same.
So we've convinced ourselves that if a developer comes in and calls something workforce housing, it's going to be 1.2. But if a developer comes in and says it isn't workforce housing, but then rents it to workforce people, it's going to be a 0.95. I guess that's the question I have.
And would they condominiumize workforce housing to accomplish that? I don't know.
Yeah. That's the Firelight deal, right?
To accomplish that? I don't know.
Yeah. That's the Firelight deal, right? Firelight was never created initially from the developer to be workforce housing. It's turned into that over time. I think that was Dick's point.
Right. Well, at least the Firelight stuff and everything we're seeing laid out in front of us, I don't think any of that's going to be condominiumized, correct? The housing trust project and the Navy property across the road, I don't think any of those are planned to be condominiums. But
yeah, I don't think so. It didn't sound like it from what TD&H was telling us just now.
yeah.
This is Laura. That's correct. They're not.
Okay. Well, Laura, you're on the meeting. This squarely potentially hits workforce housing with the housing trust. We're curious what your reaction might be to that.
Well, hold on, Ron. And so that brings up an interesting point. Do we need to have this moniker condominiums on this? Because if we're not, like these projects you're talking about aren't condominiumized, do we need to have an apartment or something criteria?
Well, yes, we do. And so the recommendation is for apartments, ADUs, housing, whether they're condos or apartments.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pay attention, Mike. Okay.
No, those are good questions. We spent time talking about it at the committee level on what should be included in this bucket.
Before we get Laura's comments, Mike, you have anything else?
No, thanks.
Go ahead, Laura.
Yeah, I appreciate all the data analysis that went into this. And as an engineer, I like things being based on data. So, I think you guys did a good job of coming up with something that makes sense.
I think it's very defensible on
Yeah.
what we've put forward. And we've also created a basis to revisit this over time, which I think is solid.
Ron, what is that basis?
Well, the basis is we just keep adding to the model and the data. So every quarter gets added into this. So over time, we can look at usage as we go forward and as Big Sky evolves with the rental markets, workforce housing, how these people use their condominiums and homes.
That was my concern, that if we do approve it, that we do have a mechanism to revisit it periodically. I don't know if we've formalized that as annually or every 2 years, 3 years, or whatever, but we definitely have to have a qualification in there that this is not locked in solid for the future and can be revisited as data requires.
Right. I think that's a fair comment.
How do you handle applications that are in process when we do stuff like this, Ron? Is there a grandfathering, or is it like applicable 3 months from now or something like that? Or how does this work?
So, I mean, these things go into effect after they're formally adopted. The question is leading into the Powderlight permit. They've got a permit application for building 3, and we process that with the current SFE calculations that are on our books effective the date they applied for their permit. So I don't think the 1.20 should work into the Powderlight Building 3 permit that we're going to be talking about here. But going forward, certainly anything else they might do, this would be fair game.
Well, Ron, since I don't want to get into this Powderlight 3 right now, but since they're asking for a variance, so to speak, and it has to have board approval, we can put restrictions on that as well, can't we?
I believe you can, and we've got Susan on the meeting as well, and she may be able to comment on that from a legal standpoint.
Well,
Yeah,
we'll talk
I'm
about
sorry,
that
I
when we
stepped
get
out,
to
so
it.
you'll have to re-ask the question.
Oh, well, that's all right, Susan. We're going to get into that later. We're still kind of just going through understanding this right now. And so I wanted to go to Bill Shropshire and ask him if he has any comments or questions about this proposal.
Bill, you're muted.
I was muted, I think. If you ask if I have any questions or comments, the answer is no.
Okay, thank you, Bill. Any of the committee members want to weigh in, or should I just open it up to general comments and questions from the trustees?
I think you covered my points well. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, mine as well. Thanks.
Well, I'm good. So what are people thinking before we come up with a resolution for the next meeting?
This is Dick. I support it with the caveat that we leave it open to revisit when we have better data, from the actual usage.
I would agree, and I think that's what we're doing now, right? This is the type of review that happens over time as a district that we're applying some historical numbers to adjust our tables to accommodate the current usage. So I think what Dick is requesting is exactly what's going on right now.
Good point, Mike.
Yeah.
Well, Ron, I think you have your marching orders that come up with a resolution, and we'll get back into this and finalize it at the next meeting.
Very good.
You need a motion or anything?
I
Ron,
don't,
I have one quick question. What do we do now for a equivalent of workforce housing? Is it 0.25 equivalent of workforce housing? Is it 0.25 SFEs per bed, per unit? What's the criteria right now?
well, so this all started back when we had this category that had this workforce housing designation of 1.0 SFEs per unit, which actually affected one lake condo years and years ago, which we deleted. And then this has evolved into this committee and where we're at today. The other thing that's going to go away is on our current SFE schedule, we've still got this old dorm style category that has a 0.25 SFE per bed allocation there. The resolution that I will put together will delete that as well. So we're going to have one category. It'll be 1.20 per 1,000 square feet for workforce housing types of projects, apartments, accessory dwellings.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to business action item, Powderlight, Lot 3, employee housing.
So we've got a permit application in the board packet. I've got their submittal and included a cover letter from Derek and their permit application. And then I've got some of the my worksheet on the total SFEs for that development. It's a little bit less than building 4 at 32.25 SFEs. There's some lot layouts there. The deficit, so I got into the weeds a little bit with the history of this whole thing, but the lots, there's 4 lots down there on track 1. Lot 3 is adjacent to lot 4, just to the west. Lot 4 is the building 4 that's has already been permitted at 33.85. That leaves a remainder of 12.15 SFEs. Building 3 had an allocation of 6.5, so that creates 18.65. So the deficit works out to 13.6 SFEs for that project. All
Ron,
of this,
I was asking you to come up with what a resolution was, because you're assuming that it is okay to move SFEs from lot 4 to lot 3. And I just don't recall what our resolution, the details of that, whether that was permissible.
the resolution did away with reallocating SFEs. Now they could go ahead and combine those 2 lots, which would have the same effect, and aggregate them together since they are adjacent. So, I mean, the board could force that as a condition of this, that they have to combine the lots to get those SFEs combined for the 2 projects. And we do allow aggregation of lots in the district, and it goes on every year, not that much, but in the county allows it. So,
I've done it.
yeah, you did it, Tom, years ago. That's right. So, to your comment, technically, yes, you could claim that, well, there's no overage on building 4 that can be claimed for lot 3, unless they combine it somehow. So this does essentially make it easier for them to use the SFEs on lot 4 that are a remainder for their permit. I don't know why lot 4 ended up with 46, but it did.
So Ron, do you have the language on a resolution that we can look at?
I've got to go pull it up, so let me go do that. You guys can talk through this as I find that.
Well, I think Ron put out 3 options. Number one is approve the permit up to 18.65 SFEs, which leaves them short for a building that they're having built off-site and is already in works, I guess. They have option 2 is allowing a one-time exemption to our resolution that would allow them to reallocate 13.6 SFEs from the McBride property, which was the old Lauren Bow, which was Lauren Bow. It was sold to McBride, sold it to Lauren Bow, and then crossed a sub corporation of Cross Harbor bought it and owns it today. And then I don't have to see option 3 in front of me. See option 3 in front of me. Ron, can you show us option 3?
He's still grabbing the resolution there, Tom. I'm looking for it here. There it is. It looks like.
Option 3 looks like it comes out of the pool of 500. Or Tom? You're on mute, Tom.
You're right, and I remember that now, and that would require, I guess, resort tax and affordable housing trust to agree to that. I guess my observation of option 2 is first, it goes against our resolution that we're not allowing. It's kind of precisely what the ordinance was about, as I recall, is that this trading of SFVs was something that we didn't want going on in the district any longer. And I don't think from what Ron's comments were is, and I don't think from what Ron's comments were is that they're really not giving up anything, because he doesn't view it as that's a buildable piece of property that they could get a full SFE build out on.
Well, is the housing trust even participating in this project?
You know, Mike, I don't think they are or have been so far. I think they are about the I guess it's a Powderlight across the street, but the American Bank property they are, but I don't think they were ever a participant in this. But that opens a can of worms as does for this development. But that opens a can of worms as does for this development. Do they want to open up housing for the entire community, or is this being reserved for Low Mountain Land Company employees? Laura Seathang, am I correct in that?
Yeah, you are. We have not been involved in this, nor been asked to be involved in this part of the project.
This is Derek with TD&H Engineering. From my understanding, the intent is just to kind of lease it out to the businesses, that being all Lone Mountain Land Company businesses, I couldn't say.
Here's what we did. So this is, it was an amendment to our sewer use ordinance back in 2015. So it basically sunset or terminated the reallocation of SFEs back in December 31, 2015. And after which we actually processed SFE reallocation applications at the December meeting in 2015, and we haven't done one since.
I guess it's a question for Susan. Can we go against this resolution if we or do a variance against this resolution if we caveat the variance for employee housing or common ownership or something like that? We didn't address common ownership at the time, right?
Correct. Well,
ownership at the time, right?
Correct. Well, back when we had reallocations as part of our policies, they had to be quote, commonly owned. And so we saw some corporations spun up, with members that were on both different corporate entities that worked for the reallocation applications. But common ownership has always been part of the criteria for reallocation. Susan, are you still on the meeting?
I am, and I guess I've never had any question that when the ordinance said any person who owns land, singular, that it was a single entity or person owning multiple parcels. If you look at that definition, it says a person shall mean an individual or a corporation only. So it's one, not more than one.
Right, but this effectively ended the whole reallocation application process we used to do. And it terminated at the end of 2015.
Right, and then there are federal reasons why we couldn't allow reallocations, right? You all recall that? We were then allowing people to sell commodities and converting our services to commodities, and that's a whole nother can of worms that we have strategically and specifically not allowed. So I guess I need somebody to reframe the question of what you're struggling with here. I'm sorry.
I'll reframe it. I guess I'd ask this, Susan. This is Brian. Is there a mechanism for an exception or a variance to this ordinance modification? Is there a? In fact, we would be looking at probably 2 exceptions or 2 variants for this. Do we have a mechanism to review that?
I don't believe so.
Okay, does that make sense for the rest of the board? I just wanted to ask the question clear. Can we entertain that option? And I will go on record. I remember this really well, and remember voting for a different option on this as well. And I wasn't for maybe necessarily saying including that language, but I get it. I just want to make sure that your opinion is we don't have the opportunity, or we do have the opportunity to grant a variance to this. That's all.
Well, I'd say Susan's comment on federal law too kind of takes that out of the mix, because I mean, us granting a variance in violation of federal law I'm not sure I want to go there.
No, I heard her loud and clear, Tom. I just wanted to clarify it because it just seemed like there maybe was an option, but if there isn't, I understand.
By ordinance, and then we changed our ordinance and eliminated it.
That is the option, is to change the ordinance, rewrite it, go through that whole process, 2 readings in 30 days, and then we could come back and look at this. If something passed.
And then I guess that is one option.
Yeah, this was an emotional issue. I remember this well. Les Lobel, I learned less on this one personally, so I remember it well.
There is a public comment. I assume it's from Steve Johnson. Is that there is a difference? His comment, and I can't read it and still talk at the same time, but that there's a difference between affordable and workforce housing, and that this development is workforce housing, whereas the American Bank property is kind of a combo of workforce and affordable housing.
Well, then one of the other options I put forward was using the interlocal agreement 500 SFE pool that's out there potentially as a source for the deficit on the building 3 permit.
Well, I think you may not have been in the room, but I would say even before we can float that proposal, that resort tax and the Affordable Housing Trust would need to come to grips with this. And I'm not sure they're going to want to do this on the fly. So if you wanted to take action today, it sounds to me like the only option we could approve, which is not what Powderlight wants, is to approve option 1. Am I drawing the right conclusion here?
Well, that still involves transferring from one lot to another.
Well, and we'd have to say, you'd have to make it subject to conditional on putting the 2 lots together into one.
Right. Right. At least at this point.
So where does the board want to go on this?
Don't we have, Ron, don't we have a little bit of a problem with this one, if I remember right, where the developer had a rate schedule that was on our webpage and they applied at some point in time? I don't remember what all the drama was there, but there was some story to that, right?
Right, on building 4, which predated this one, all the angst originally was over that category, 1 SFE per unit. At the end of the day, the board had to approve building 4's permit, and we had to approve building 4's permit, and we use the square footages as the basis for that. And then, so building 3 on lot 3 is an altogether new application that we just received.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think we have a representative for TD&H. What is your feeling that if the board decided with conditions of approval option 1 for only some of your SFEs?
Eric, are you still on?
Yeah, yep. I was just trying to think of option 1. Just to clarify what option 1 is.
It's right here. So it's basically.
I think he's calling in so he can't see anything.
Oh, got you. So option 1 basically permits up to 18.65 SFEs of development, which is the combined total of what's assigned to lot 3 and the remainder, which is on lot 4. So it gets you a little more than halfway to the full building SFE number, which is 32 and change.
And Derek, that would we would have to make a conditional that you would aggregate lot 3 and lot 4.
Right. I'd probably want to kick this over to the client without giving a official statement from my end, but.
So what that lot aggregation, Derek, that creates a new subdivision COSA submittal, I'm guessing?
Yeah, we'd have to go through that process, and it might open up a can of worms because we have the conditional use permit and the BLR permit specifically for lot 3 and lot 4. So if we do a lot aggregation, I don't know if Gallatin County would make us go back through to update the language of all the conditions of approval on those documents, as well as DQ. We'd have to go get an updated COSA and get an approved plat through Gallatin County.
Yeah. And if the board wants to delve into amending our ordinance to allow SFEs to come in from COS 214, formerly the bow piece, you could, I would think you could allow the lot 4 stuff to be used on lot 3 without creating the lot aggregation.
Well, I think Susan weighed in on that, saying that we don't have the ability to create a variance or an exception to our resolution.
Unless you amend your ordinance, right?
Well, that's another can of worms.
Yeah, we know how much fun that process is.
Well, then it sounds to me that we have one or two ways to go on this. Is we can table this and let the applicant reapply for and talk about it at next meeting, which would also, I assume we're going to have a resolution for the employee housing sewer connection permit. Or we could take a vote today to approve or deny option 1.
Right.
What are the plans for lot 2? There are some SFVs on that also.
Correct. And lot 2 is
8.9.
right. This is lot 2 right here. At one time, they were looking at a bar restaurant. I think that's fallen away. Bar restaurant. I think that's fallen away. Derek, do you know if there's any plans for that?
Last I saw was a bar restaurant, but the last I've heard is that developer hasn't been moving forward, and he's granted access for Knife River and the Tiger Grant infrastructure to utilize that lot as their storage.
Right. Yeah, bar restaurants last I heard on it as well.
I feel like we should table it. The applicant's not even here. TD&H is saying that he can't really make the call for the applicant. I don't know. I mean,
Mike, I think you're right. The only realistic option is to table this today and go back through on other avenues or how they want to approach this. We could give them exceptions to the SFVs and charge them a premium for this exception of granting additional SFVs.
Say that again, Tom.
We could say that we grant all the SFVs that they're requesting, but for the ones that are in excess of what they're allowable, and the question is whether they're allowed of what they're allowable, and the question is whether they're allowed 18.65 or the lower amount from moving SFVs over from lot 4, and for those SFVs in excess of what they're allowed, we could have a motion to give those to them, but charge them a premium over normal costs. And Ron said something about $3,500, and I assume per SFV. But I also thought that's the Boyne penalty, but that was a penalty that was put in place 28 years ago or something like that. I think there should be a little inflation on that if we wanted to go that direction.
Call it a surcharge, not a penalty. We'd like to call it a surcharge.
Okay, it's a surcharge, whatever you want to call it.
To call it a surcharge, not a penalty. We'd like to call it a surcharge.
Okay, it's a surcharge, whatever you want to call it.
No penalty here. It was a settlement surcharge. So, yeah, That's what we pay. We pay a 35% surcharge on every SFE. So
3,500.
Yep. So we're 7,000 total.
The Mountain Lakes project, that was charged at $10,000 per single family equivalent per our annexation agreement with those folks. And I did, in my report, I said you could use the 3,500 as kind of a minimum. The board could certainly go higher if it chose to. You know, I've looked at this COS 214, the McBride piece. Looked at it in a lot of detail back in 2016 when Low Mountain Land was working towards developing that with 32 units and had a subdivision submittal in front of us. And you know, you can argue about how much of that 10 acres is buildable, but using densities around it, you know, it looked to me like you could maybe do up to 65 SFPs of development, which I think probably is too much in there. So as I looked at COS 214, which is now owned by a subsidiary company of Cross Harbor as a source for potential SFEs, reducing the development envelope over there makes a lot of sense to me. So if we were to allow that to happen, then I would want to pin down on how much SFE development would actually take place over there by having them sign some sort of document to that effect. But we're not going there today.
Well, and hopefully we're not going there ever. But is there any reason we could not just grant Lot 3 the SFDs they want and then put conditions on that?
I think you've got authority to do a lot of things, but we've got Susan in the room. What do you think?
You've got me what?
You're in the room when you think about what Tom just said.
Tom would have to repeat what he just said.
I'm saying, first of all, on moving SFEs from the Lauren Bow property, I'll call it, to Lot 3. I'm not much of in favor of doing that because this is precisely why we passed that resolution. But is there any reason why on this Lot 3 application that we could not just up their allocation of SFDs and charge them a premium for those SFDs beyond what are currently allocated?
Well, so here's my response, which is, first of all, I think you are all correct in the fact we have no process to move them between two unrelated owners. I do not believe you can just simply decide that they want to ask for more SFEs applied to a particular lot because they haven't done that. You can't charge a premium. You can charge the SFEs applied to a particular lot because they haven't done that. You can't charge a premium. You can charge the normal fee if they decide that's what they want to do to resolve the issue. Make sense?
I hear you. It's not very, doesn't look good for them. I would say that.
I can't help that.
Well, since the applicant is not here today, I would suggest and take Mike's recommendation that we table this. And so I would entertain a motion to table this.
So moved.
Motion by Bill Shropshire. Do we have a second?
Peter Manka just seconded.
Peter Manka seconds. All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. So we're on to old business now, capital improvement plan. And we've got the WWTP upgrade with Scott Bucher.
Scott, are you on?
Yes, he is.
Sorry.
I think we got onto this too quickly for you, Scott.
Right. You went from 0 to 60 in 3 seconds. I have to run at 10 and we've got Trent here, so I'm going to rifle through my update. And if anybody wants to talk about anything in particular, we can go back. RCI continues to work on excavation and site piping installations down there, starting to get at the slabs on the fermenter and headworks, and Trent might touch on that a little bit more. I mean, part of the whole delay is that, just as an example, rebar is just arriving this week, so that's why we haven't seen much happen. I think Trent's here to help with trial batching and get some concrete flowing soon. ARPA, that continues to go through. Governor's office approved that recommendation, so everybody who had a good application gets $2 million, and you all are in line for that. I think Ron has the letter for commitment from the governor's office now. The second round is going to be due January 14th, and we're working on the Mountain Village water system improvements. So we have a good 30% PER for that.
Scott, on that water, it scored 115. I mean, we're kind of hearing the legislature's likely to keep using their 2 million cap for round 2. I think that potentially puts us in the running. What do you think?
I had to mute him because he's speaking back a little bit. Scott, you're muted.
Scott, you're muted. We're getting feedback from you.
Oh, no, I agree. I think if you put your hand out with a good application and a match, you should be able to get the 2 million for Mountain Village, which just based on scale is that's a third to a half of that project. So it's worth it.
Scott, could we put in an application for the process basins of phase 2 cost, which is 4 million plus?
Well, we essentially put that in in the first round and got 2 million in the first round and got 2 million. So I guess your question would be, could we rehash that application and go for 2 million more? And I mean, we could, but I don't think it would. I think they'll recognize it as just the same project coming back with different specifics.
Gotcha.
I'll chew on that a little bit, but I don't think that would have a good chance of getting 2 million more. Especially, they're beating their chest over spreading the money to the maximum amount possible. We did put both the projects in, the water reclamation facility and the Cascade Mountain Village water system improvements through the county, Gallatin County, and their minimum allocation. They'd opened up round 1. We were not successful. We did receive a very brief explanation prior to this meeting that did not make it into the board update letter. That was not very satisfactory. It was basically, we didn't have very much money, and these are the projects we chose to fund, and they were water and wastewater, so that was a little frustrating. And we'll work with Ron and the county to see if it's worth going back at them for round 2.
Yeah, I think I have, from the county. It wasn't a very good answer. I think this was it.
Is that a packet?
Yeah, it was in the board packet, so I add the governor's letter in there as well. For ARPA.
It's way down there somewhere.
Yeah. And Madison County, Scott, still hasn't rolled out their process yet, is my understanding.
No, they're playing catch up, but they also only have something like $900,000 compared to what Gallatin County had at 22 million. Gallatin County went and did other things with 19 million and then found 3 million more. So they had a pool of six. Madison County, we'll just have to see what they do with it and how much is there. You know, if you want us to put a package together for them. Gallatin County did cite the fact that some of that Mountain Village project is cross county and therefore factored into their evaluation.
Right.
That Mountain Village work is proceeding. Jim's been helping us out and Vince's been helping us out. So appreciate that. We should be able to have a good 30 by the application deadline for state ARPA. Wastewater collection system model, we found a few pieces that hadn't been surveyed by TD&H. We're reaching out with them and going to try to get that work done before snow covers everything. I'd say 90% at least of your collection system is surveyed, and we can certainly get going on that if the snow beats us and we can't get out there, but we're trying to fix that and get it all fleshed out. Succession planning, we got a meeting Friday with the subcommittee, and I think that's going reasonably well, and everybody's caught up and making some progress there. I don't know, Ron, if you want to talk about plans there, if we want to get through the committee meeting on Friday and then report back.
Well, we've got a committee for Friday. I forwarded, I believe it was seven resumes we've received for the GM position, and that went to the committee. So we'll talk about those on Friday.
Other work. The Grant and I've been working on, he's got a proposal for 300 feet of steel pipe with the idea of stashing that up along the reuse force main in case of a slide or just having some pipe around in case that pipeline fails. You all have the equipment and contractors. You could get up there, have the pipe on site and expedite repair of that. I think that's smart money in my opinion, and I believe it was like 33,000. But Ron has the what is in effect a purchase order, and I think that's Ron has the what is in effect a purchase order, and I think that's a good move long term. The key there is stashing it somewhere.
Is that Zaplock?
It's not Zaplock, but it's steel pipe that it's dimensionally correct, so you can get it welded. You know, for Zaplock, you'd have to have that extremely high pressure. I don't even know what they call that thing. Basically, a fuse. You know, it just jams the pipe together at such high force that it essentially becomes a weld. So you need somebody that can weld stainless. And until that person gets on site and can do the work, that force main would be down. But I think this is better than not having the pipe and having, especially with COVID and having, especially with COVID and just the issues of, if that pipe was 6 months out, you'd hate to find that out when you've got a rupture, a real rupture, versus the pinholes that you've seen today that are not that big of a deal. Horse pasture meter vaults. Grant also has a proposal for those that you all could move forth with if you want to meter those flows next year. And then the irrigation booster pumps, we got proposals for the impellers that were shocking in price. I thought that 10-20% more flow, if it could be easily gotten at with new impellers, was a no-brainer for this winter. It's not a no-brainer. It's quite expensive, long lead time, and it's not a no-brainer. It's quite expensive, long lead time, and I think the district is generally kind of fed up with having to deal with those pumps, and so we want to look at other makes and models. So we're doing that, and also looking at pond 2. Well, nobody calls it pond 2, but re-aeration or recirculation pond cleanout prior to next fall, so that people could make snow with that reuse water if they wanted next year. Getting that cleaned out and talking with RCI at a very high level right now to see if that's something we could potentially put under their contract and have them be the prime on. So there's Ron's cursor on that reservoir, and have them be the prime on. So there's Ron's cursor on that reservoir.
Which basically water coming from the plant, everything goes through the plant to the north, comes across and is held in this pond here. So it's different water than what we've got in the other 2 ponds. So that's why I know Grant was going to do some work in pond to see what we've got in the bottom of that thing, but there's aerators in there. It's not a just blow and go kind of project. So we've got to think through how we would clean that out. The level of that pond basically stays the same year round. It's a static overflow. We can pump it down, but it's just a whole different animal than the other 2.
Is that water pre-chlorinated?
It is pre-chlorinated, yes.
So how is that water different than the other ponds?
It is not chlorinated yet. That happens as it goes through the filtration.
Gotcha. So that's the difference between the ponds. Is that pond, it's not chlorinated, and then by the time it goes into the other 2 ponds, it is chlorinated?
Correct. So this is the lower pump house. So we move water from here through this pump house up to the filter building here, where we've got a chlorine contact chamber in the lower level. There it gets chlorinated, and goes into the irrigation pond, or pond number 3.
This to jump in, it's chlorinated and filtered.
And filtered, yes.
Yep. Or filtered and chlorinated to be persnickety, but yeah, it's just not treated as highly, and it's got sediment in it over the years. It's kind of now acting as its own biological thing, and algae, and so you got to clean that one up first. Downstream, the larger reservoirs, there's other possibilities there, keeping the water clean, such as the aeration that you see there in that photo. Maybe some sonar to cut back on algae growth next year, things like that. But for that re-aeration pond, it's really just about getting down there and dewatering it, and getting getting down there and dewatering it and starting fresh. And we also keep talking to RSCI about the possibility of the phase 2 concrete. So that's still on their radar. They just asked, given the schedule delays and knowing that the district moved forward with the annexation approval last month and growth rates and all that we keep in mind of keeping that out of any sort of phase 1, or milestone 1 conversation. So we just let them focus on liquid startup as fast as possible, additional concrete on the side. You know what I mean? Like, don't let that interfere with any of the critical schedule goals here.
Yeah, if I had my druthers, I would take that. If I had my druthers, I would take that $2 million we got from the state and put that towards this. And that would mean we would have to finance the other $2+ million. And I think that's a discussion we need Terry for, to find out if we do have the ability to pay for that or not. But it seems like the way the growth in this community is happening, that preparing for phase 2 now makes a lot of sense.
I agree with you, Tom.
Okay, well, that's all I've got. If anybody wants to discuss any of that in more detail, let's do it. But otherwise, I'd like to kick it over to Trent, just because I have to take off at about. I'd like to kick it over to Trent, just because I have to take off at about 10 a.m.
Okay.
All right. Can everybody hear me okay?
We can, and we can see you too.
Yeah, good deal. I wanted to make sure you could see a face. So just a real quick introduction before I get into everything. So my name is Trent Dyksterhouse. I'm the project manager for RSCI. So we're the general contractor. Appreciate your guys' audience to talk about this today. So just a little quick backstory. So I've worked here for about 13, 14 years. I grew up in the Manhattan Churchill area, right locally here. So RSCI is based out of Boise. So I've worked for them for a little over a decade, but this is like coming back home. Most of the family still lives around here. So I think that's been really enjoyable. So we got notice to proceed on this job June the 7th. We had our pre-construction meeting at June the 7th. We had our pre-construction meeting on June the 2nd, and already then we were trying to make AE2S and Ron aware of some of the challenges we were having. I think if you followed remotely the construction market and just supply chain disruptions, even not in construction, whether it's even automobiles or what have you, pretty much everything has kind of been goofed up due to COVID. So the contract has a provision that allows for these unanticipated disruptions and interferences. So really right out of the gate, the number one task we had to do was to relocate all the existing utilities and underground piping that was serving the plant. And so I have a little spreadsheet that I didn't include with the packet here, but pretty much none of the piping materials that was normally either readily available off the shelf or usually available within a couple weeks time, that was all out to like 10, 12 week lead time. A lot of the valve, or usually available within a couple weeks time, that was all out to like 10, 12 week lead time. A lot of the valves are even out to like 20, 22, 24 weeks. So really, from the time we got the go ahead, we weren't able to start really our main scope, what the term we used in earnest. Really, we spent all of the bulk of June, July, and August trying to round up our materials so we could start. So a lot of our other efforts were then spent on getting the job site set up, the temp fence, getting our batch plant here and organized, starting to do some excavation, and we got all the area exposed there next to the existing aeration basins. So really, we kind of burned up those first 3 months waiting for our pipe material to show up, and that didn't really happen until the end of August. So that's kind of big picture where that 90-day calendar extension request came in. Obviously, that's non-compensable. That clearly isn't our fault. That's not your guys' fault as the owner. I mean, nobody could have anticipated that. So it clearly isn't our fault. That's not your guys' fault as the owner. I mean, nobody could have anticipated that. So it's all non-compensable. We're not seeking any sort of compensation for that. One example of the kind of the COVID, I guess, impacts specifically on piping was AE2S had specified a 14-inch line, which I talked about in a little write-up, and manufacturers just discontinued making that pipe size altogether. So we worked together and changed it to a combination of 12 and 16-inch. But I mean, things like that is what we're really combating, just to be able to kind of start our work. So that doesn't even really take into account kind of the pricing aspect of it. A couple other items I'll just hit on real quick, but the rebar, right? I think Scott had mentioned that as well, right? But we got the rebar guys signed up again back in June, and then there was a variety of price increases, and then there was a mill that burned down over in Oregon, and so we didn't get our first shipment of rebar until I think it was last Friday over in Oregon, and so we didn't get our first shipment of rebar until I think it was last Friday. So we finally got that on site, and that ended up being about $150,000 cost increase that we've absorbed, right? We're not intending to go back and seek that from the owner, just in effort to be a good partner there. And then just another example, again, that doesn't impact the work right now, but steel joists and deck, part of that whole steel escalation. A lot of those things are originally like 8 to 10 weeks, and we're being quoted like 10 to 14 months. So I know that doesn't impact the work now, but that's another pretty large scale example. And there's a variety of those. And that's another one where it's going to be probably about $165,000 price increase from when we bid the job to now. So again, those costs we've just absorbed about a total of about $315,000 to date that we're not planning to come back and seek from the ownership group or the board, right? Just again, nobody can to come back and seek from the ownership group or the board, right? Just again, nobody can control it, but I think that's kind of a good sign of partnering on our end. So really the request to you folks would be to maybe work with us on this liquid startup that Scott mentioned. That's really our big push. And given that we couldn't do that work in earnest through June, July, and August, and we finally started getting some traction there in September, we would request that non-compensable extension and push our liquid startup from, I think it's February 23 into late May. So that's the maybe not so quick summation, but that's the high level. We could obviously get into more detail, and I'll open it up to any questions that you guys may have.
Trent, this is Tom Reeves. My question is I know you're in a really challenging environment right now. Is this the worst case scenario, or is this just environment right now? Is this the worst case scenario, or is this just the scenario you see currently? Could this timeline slip even greater? Because I don't see the supply chain challenges improving anytime soon. They're talking about at least a year, if not 2 years, before things get back to what we call normal.
Sure. No, that's a great question. And my response to that would be really, so I think of it in terms of like when you get a rebar package as a contractor, right? And really that first rebar package is the most critical one. It's the base slabs. And then eventually when you get that first rebar package, that allows you 2 months worth of work before you really need the walls or anything else like that. So I guess my analogy is this kind of initial quote first package for the underground piping kind of set us back. And now this kind of initial quote first package for the underground piping kind of set us back. And now I know, for example, polyiso insulation is another example, right? That's the insulation that's specified for the roofing here. That's out to a 9-month lead time. And so we know we have these crazy lead times. And so given that we would have a liquid startup there, potentially spring of 2023, we can be more proactive to buy that stuff out and avoid these impacts. So can I sit here and look you in the eyes and tell you we're not going to have any more impacts and the supply chain is going to go smooth? No, but we have the ability now that we have this initial scope out of the way. We have our concrete in place. We have our steel guys signed up. We have our precast guys signed up. I mean, that pretty much takes us through next summer worth of work. And so we have I guess, somewhat of like a 9-month to year head start to buy out the balance of these other scope of work. So I don't expect that there'll be a giant hiccup, right? I mean, other scope of work. So I don't expect that there'll be a giant hiccup, right? I mean, if we suddenly get a weird, hey, electrical gear is now 32 weeks out, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. But I think the boiled down answer is we have more time to react to these other scopes now that we kind of have this initial stuff addressed.
My question in all this, and I pointed it out in my little write-up on this in my manager's report, is you're not asking for any compensation. I understand that. This potentially extends A2S's contract for construction admin services. So I would like to not amend their contract, obviously, and pay more money for those construction admin services, even though we're extending the contract out 90 days. And I would think we'd be able to figure that out 90 days. And I would think we'd be able to figure that out and work with A2S to make that happen. But Scott, if you would comment.
Yeah, I've been talking to Kaepernick and Youngworth about that, of let's find as much other things to do as we're humming along here with RSCI. And we had Youngworth scoped to be up there on site about half time, and obviously Kaepernick full time. We still kind of need that because there's underground work going on, but we haven't had to have Youngworth up there working out of your offices. So we've tried to throttle as much as we can, and we'll continue to do that. And it's a long contract, it's a long duration, and we'll just do the best we can to match speed, and we'll just do the best we can to match speed and see how we can do.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry, Ron.
No, I said that's a good answer. My concern was that I'd be immediately facing a contract amendment with A2S if this extension is granted. I'm not hearing that. It is a very long contract. We should be able to figure it out and balance construction admin with additional time under the same fee and scope.
Yeah, you've seen some big numbers from us, but that's primarily because RSCI has the paper side of their work is not that they've charged out of the gate with submittals and RFIs and RFCs and all that stuff. So we've had plenty to do on the paper side, even though the field work has been slower.
Any other trustee questions? Ron, do we need a board motion on this?
I think we should have one, Tom, approving the contract extension, and then we'll follow it up with the paperwork.
I entertain a motion.
I'll make it then if it's necessary.
Was that a motion from Brian?
It was, thanks.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
We have a motion by Brian Wheeler, a second by Dick Fast to grant RSCI's 90-day calendar extension on their contract. And is there any other comments? Not. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Passes unanimously.
I think that takes care of the wastewater section of the meeting.
Ron, could I ask one question real quick? Is employee succession planning, have we gotten to that, or is employee succession planning, have we gotten to that, or is we're still getting there?
We're getting there.
Fine.
I talked to Mark Kinane yesterday. It was questionable whether he'd be able to be here at our meeting. He's down in West Yellowstone, so he couldn't make it. I included a couple emails, some of his charts, which are kind of cryptic. He'll be on our meeting in November to present this information to the board, and he's also going to have his summary report put together. So this is all just FYI. The pump test went well. We did a 3-day pump test on the 2 wells on the mountain. We did run into some boundary conditions that occurred toward the end of those and well 7. We saw pumping effects in test well number 2, which is actually quite a ways away, but we were running these a couple hundred gallons a minute. So the volumes were pretty good. The water quality looks pretty good. So they're not ruled out as potential production wells at this point, but we'll hear from Mark in more detail at the November meeting. ARPA, we already touched on. I put a copy of the governor's letter in the board packet, which is our $2 million award. Gallatin County also announced that it selected the Canyon for $750,000. So collectively, the Canyon's got $2.75 million now to work with. They rolled out the second round 2 phase of the competitive bids from October 5th to January 14th. Round 1 got down into 60 applicants. Our water project scored 115 without any additional supporting changes to our application. I think we've still got a potential chance to get money in round 2 if they hold to the same award model, which is $2 million max cap for each project, but we will see. This was the email Scott referred to with the county's reasoning as to why we weren't selected, which really didn't get into much detail. I didn't think, but there is a round 2 to the county allocation, so there's still a potential we could qualify for some money there.
Would there be any benefit in modifying our application there?
We're doing that with the water project. We're trying to get a PER put together. Peter's question was, is there benefit to modifying our application? And we're working on that for the water stuff with the engineering contracts we've got with A2S and some of this work that Jim and Vince are doing. So that engineering work should theoretically help our scoring with that.
I think that the county rejecting it in part because it's got some cross-county benefit might help your case with the state as well.
Right. That's a good point. Moving down to developments, we already talked about the workforce housing. Legal, we'll have closed session at the end of the meeting to talk about the latest settlement offer. Employee succession planning. Tom, you had something.
My only question was, and comment is, I know that Grant has given notice for the end of the year. How is that process going at this point in time? And secondly, as I know you have a subcommittee meeting on on your part of the succession planning. Would it be possible to see the rest of the board to see those applications?
Sure. I'll just forward you what I sent to the committee.
Hey, Tom, we have a meeting on Friday as well. Mike and Wilsinski and I think Schropp, you replied on it as well. But we have a meeting this Friday. We had a meeting, I don't know, 6 weeks ago. But and Ron, I'm assuming that you'll participate in that meeting on Friday.
Oh yeah. Yep.
So I think it'd be great to have on the next agenda kind of a comprehensive update on it, so it doesn't come in piecemeal on where everyone's at. Go right down the list. Tom, maybe that'd be on where everyone's at. Go right down the list. Tom, maybe that'd be helpful. Make sure it's something that we cover in detail at our next meeting.
Okay. And you're not dealing with Grant's replacement, are you?
No.
So we have a candidate we're going to make an offer to come in as a new operator.
Perfect. So now, along with the going away for Packy and the Christmas party for the last 5 years, we've got another party.
Yeah. You're leaving town though, Tom.
Yeah, I probably won't make it, but you never know.
All right. Got it. New business, I don't really have anything else to add. I guess I did comment, there's a community forum that the resort tax is sponsoring at the Wilson at the end of October 26th. And I'm actually double booked. I've got to speak at MSU for the water conference, the fall water school. So I don't know if Scott Bucher's still on the meeting, but I may need somebody from A2S to cover for this. I don't know if we can all do it remotely or not, but I'll find out.
What's the topic? Resort? I could probably have Ryan do it. You and I are on the agenda at MSU.
We're both at MSU, and then I'm on that panel afterwards from 3 to 5. So there's no way I can get really, unless I'm talking at 8:45, I could make that. But they've got 35 presenters in this thing. Each presenter gets 5 minutes, so it's a really quick and dirty presentation. But I think it's an in-person thing. But
do they have a detailed schedule for the presentations?
They probably do. If they do it alphabetically, we're at the front, obviously. I'll have to find out.
It looks like on the list you're about halfway through, though.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we can help out. Worst case.
I told Danny I would have a conflict, but we'll get it figured out.
That thing's going to be a marathon, huh?
It kind of is. You know, the chamber just hosted one. I actually presented at the chamber thing. When was that? 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago? And I can't even keep track of all the meetings we're in, but seems to be kind of a thing now that everybody in the community is sponsoring these community presentation forums. So this is one more of them.
Yeah, and I don't see much being covered in 5 minutes.
Yeah. Right. So I put a presentation together for the chamber this one will even be shorter, so we'll just rework it and get somebody to cover for us. Brian Wheeler, do you have to present it this thing? As Boyne?
No, I don't.
Oh, you don't? Yeah. So these are
I'm shuffling
recipients.
some new people through though, but give me that list again. Man, that is a marathon. Oh, wow.
It is a marathon.
Hang on.
How are you
Yeah.
not on there, Brian?
That's what I thought. How
Mike,
are
I'll
you?
do it right after you if you like. How's that?
Okay.
Who's doing the? Oh, that's YCCF. Yeah, it's a crazy long list, so we'll see. But we will make an appearance. Somebody will. So now we're down to closed session on the legal, unless there's anything else.
I don't think so, but Ron, I think we do need to get going on scheduling a party time for Packy before we forget what he looks like.
Okay.
Good call. Good call, Tom.
So we probably need a motion to go into closed session.
I'll make that motion.
A second.
A motion from Mike Ducennois and a second from Dick Fass. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Passes unanimously. Passes unanimously.
All right, we'll wait a minute, let people drop off. There was one
There's one chat.
chat. So this is from John. He's our newest reporter from the Lone Peak newspaper.
Hello, y'all. Good morning. This is John here. Thanks for, I just thought I'd jump in real quick and ask a few questions. Is that all right?
Yeah, if it doesn't last too long.
Nope, it'll go quick. I just was hoping, so what's the difference between WWRF and the WWTP? So the wastewater treatment plant and the wastewater reclamation facility. Are those synonymous or are they just slightly different?
They're basically the same thing.
Same thing. Okay, thought so.
The WRRF is the new upgrade. That's the acronym for that. The WTP you could use as the current facility, current wastewater plant.
Thought so. Okay, thanks for that clarification. Also, Ron, is it possible for me to get the file you referred to during the meeting, like your agenda that you refer back to via email?
Yes.
Awesome. That'd be great. If you could send me that after the meeting, that'd be fantastic. And just to confirm, you guys chatted quite a bit about the Powderlight subdivision. You've tabled that for later. Just so I'm putting this correctly for the public, the Powderlight subdivision is asking for an additional 13, or is it an additional 13 SFEs, or is it 8? Is it 18? I was kind of confused as to why there was a difference there, because you had the deficit was at 13.5, but you on option 1 you had approving them for 18.5 SFEs.
I just pulled it up, John.
Yep, I saw that. Yeah.
Well, it's really comes down to a question whether we can move from lot 4 to lot 3 SFEs that they have available or not.
Okay, so, but I guess just to confirm, my understanding is that they need an additional SFEs for lot 3. They do not have, they're not permitted for the request that they have, correct?
Correct.
Well, they're not
Got it.
permitted
And
for
so-
anything right now. They have a request for SFVs that needs to have the board approve.
Got it. And so, got it. And so, and that's where the conversation of reallocation was coming up, and that's obviously more complicated, and you guys will revisit that later. Just wanted to make sure I had that.
On the permits, by our own rules, anything over 25 SFEs in total has to be approved by the board. So that's why you're seeing this one being talked about as a standalone permit application. We approved a lot of permits administratively. This one requires board action.
Great, thank you. And then just to clarify, when you say there's going to be a rate increase from 1.20 SFEs per 1,000 square footage, what does that mean? Is that a reflection of cost, or is that just a reflection of like measuring the allocation?
Well, it's a measurement of potential capacity. The whole model, everything we've looked at is wrapped into how many single family equivalents and the water usage associated with those. There is a cost because there's a plant investment charge and a water investment charge that are pinned to the total SFEs for any given project. So it potentially is a money issue in that 1.2 times 1,000 square feet figures into what they pay for those permits.
Got it. And then the last thing, and maybe you can't comment on this just because I am unaware. I know that you guys are going to a closed session for the Cottonwood Environmental Law Center case. Is there somewhere I can read about that, or is there just like a quick background? This is less so for the paper, more so for me.
There's a lot of documents that are in the court, which are public documents.
Yep.
I can send you those.
Yeah, I mean, is it possible for you to just like briefly outline in a few sentences like what the gist of the case is against the Big Sky Water and Sewer District?
I don't think you want me talking about my feelings about this case.
Okay.
More importantly, this is the attorney. No.
Thanks, Susan.
Okay, can I ask, when did this case started in 2020, correct?
John, I hate to do this to you, but I have another meeting at 10 and I need to be on for the closed session. So is it possible for you to call Ron or I directly after the meeting and we can get you what you need?
Yes, I've just had trouble getting a hold of people after these meetings, so I prefer to do this now. That's why I'm doing this now, because it's really hard to get a hold of folks after these meetings end.
Susan Swimley, 586-5544. Ask Bella. I answer her calls too.
Okay, awesome. Okay, well, that's all I had. I just was hoping to get those picked out. Thank you.
Thanks.
A second.
Second.
Motion by Tom Reed, second by Peter Manka to go into open session. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Passes unanimous.
All right, next meeting date is November 16. Does that work for everybody?
Yep.
Okay. And that's all I've got.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.
Move to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second. I move.
All those in favor?
Bye.
Passes unanimous. See you next week or month.